Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the TLDM podcast, the only podcast where everything's made up and the points don't matter. I am one of your two hosts, Alan Linick.
And I'm Tyler Samples.
And we are greeted with a special guest today. As you know, Tyler and I DM, lore share, and play in each other's worlds. And one of the players that Tyler gets to sit with at my table is James Dugan, who is a returning guest to the podcast. Hello, James.
Hi, James.
Hey, how are you guys? Good to be here.
We had a special session recently that I wanted to kind of hash out on the podcast as like a topic of discussion, a potential mechanic for maybe listeners to try out at their tables, and also might give us some perspective, deeper perspective on a typical topic of conversation on this podcast, which is how things feel from both sides of the screen. A lot of times that player and DM experience is kind of like rigidly divided by a screen or a wall, and everyone walks away feeling different things without getting to really talk about how things felt mechanic-wise from one side and the other. And recently, the party in the Eastern campaign got to visit the inside of Grundor's mind in what we called the Great Grungeon. And since James created the character, I had him co-DM the session with me and help sort of really lead the way on building the encounters and designing the dungeon, and coming up with like cool mechanics to try for that session. So James, I guess I'll just start by asking you what that process was like and how it compared to your experience as usually being on the player side of things.
Yeah, it was a ton of fun, and it gave me it gave me a nice literal peek behind the curtain at what goes into the other side of this, because I'm a pretty new still to Dungeons and Dragons player. This is the second campaign I've done.
Oh, really?
I think, yeah. And I wish that I had come better prepared for it, because I really had no idea what to expect from the DM side. And I meant to get here early to go over stuff, but then the day just got away from me, and so I ended up showing up when everybody else did. And but it was really interesting for me to watch Alan help me out every time that I made mistakes DMing, and to just kind of weave them into the narrative. Specifically, when I killed off a lot of the characters that we were supposed to be defending, and then you reset the memory for us, so that the players could have the interaction that we had intended them to have.
Oh, your family? When your family got killed?
Yeah.
I suppose we should probably take people through like what happened in the Grungeon, just so that people can experience that. Mm-hmm. We got absorbed into like.
Well, actually, do you mind if we do so? Because the way that we built the Grungeon was, it started with James sending me just some like detailed backstory about key points in Grundor's life.
Yeah, so why don't we have you two tell us about that experience?
Well, yeah, so the only reason I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just thought it might be interesting to talk, especially here from your perspective, James, to talk about how, like, what the backstory you ended up sending my way was, mm-hmm. And how you and I worked together to turn that backstory into, like, mechanical things to do.
Yeah. Well, Grundor's character, Grundor, some call him the Stone Speaker, he has a very mysterious past that he hasn't really let the rest of the party in on, and he doesn't talk about himself. And so I kind of had a blank slate to create whatever I wanted when you asked me to write up some backstory. And man, I had such a good time with the world building of it. I think that I went on. I think I wrote a page just on what the stone language was, and like what the etiquette of how a dwarf should speak to stones was, and which we did end up using in the dungeon, not but probably not a page and a half worth of explanation worth. But so there was that, and then Grundor, since he is very closed off and doesn't offer a lot of information, I imagine that his past was pretty traumatic. So we started off with his entire family being killed in front of him, and then him being banished into the caves and just making his way on his own, talking to stones, and getting drowned or almost drowning in a river. Which the river and water aspect is more of a retcon from my point of view, because Grundor has just fallen prey to a lot of water in our adventures. He's been like swept away by rivers, and he's been knocked catatonic into bodies of water. So water seemed like a natural enemy for him, but also water is the natural enemy of stone, which is what Grundor identifies with the most.
That's real good.
Water is what erodes and changes stone. So that one just seemed kind of obvious to me. But then I think, Alan, it was your idea to rehash some of the adventures that we had so far just through Grundor's point of view, which was a ton of fun. Also, to just take the battles that we had fought and make Grundor the overwhelming hero of them, even though he absolutely was not when we actually played them.
Yeah, that was really fun to experience that of just getting to revisit things. Also, as a new character into those memories, getting to now be able to be like, oh yeah, I remember that because I experienced the memory of that thing. That was very fun. So do you guys want to then describe the parts, like sort of mechanically what you constructed for the players and how you navigated them through that?
Sure. So we sort of established, and through use of this object, which allowed the players to travel into this sort of dreamy memory state, we figured it'd be pretty easy to crossfade or like dream jump from instance to instance without needing to do too much like traveling or like in a like typical dungeoneering, there's a lot of like, how do we get across this old rickety bridge, and like where is the which tunnel do we go down, and like how this door is locked but needs a like we just kind of skipped a lot of those transitionary elements and let the edges of one dream encounter kind of like bleed into the next. And we knew that we wanted to make it kind of varied and fun. So we started in this cataclysmic death family murder scene, which the party was allowed to intervene in, but ended up playing dead to get through, which was super fun, and I don't think what either of us were anticipating.
Not at all, but also it was how Grundor, in his own memory, got through that event. So it made sense that was how success was achieved was just by emulating what Grundor had done himself.
Yeah, and we also made the choice to make the party all Grundor. And I think part of that was for fun, to have a bunch of like vaguely party-like Grundors.
Yeah, it was like if Grundor was Kirby and he had swallowed each of the party members.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we did that, and I think the hopefully, and Tyler, I guess you can speak to this from your side of it. The secondary goal of that move was to sort of make, for lack of a better term to describe it, to make the party care about the stuff a little more.
Yeah. For me, it totally did. I mean, it was a very cool mechanic to just get plopped into. And there was also, like, you guys had fleshed it out enough that it was, like, that it enabled skill checks and, like, using world information, to realize, like, oh, Grundor's family was worshipped like a non-canonical dwarven god. So they were like heretics and killed for that reason. Which then was like, oh, that's cool. That's cool stuff to know, and to play that out. So it definitely like made for rich stuff. I am curious what you guys had alternately planned for us defend, because that was the one thing when we were defending the family, was like knowing like, well, of course they die because it's a memory. And we ended up playing dead, and I'm curious how you were going to like handle the, like, if we had tried to fight off the guys and like killed the invaders or whatnot, like what you would have done if we had like just continued to put up a stand.
Wow, that's a great question. I don't know that we had a contingency plan.
I think the answer to that is we would have killed the family off around you as you were winning the fight.
Also, the enemies that we had for you were even just starting to show their, what were they called?
Oh yeah, we kind of manipulated, and something we had to play with that was super fun was thinking about what these memories would look like from Grundor's perspective rather than like hitting word for word what actually happened. So we figured from a literal young tiny boy perspective, watching a bunch of angry dwarves come in and kick down the door and kill his family while they tried to put up a fight and failed would feel a lot like big scary monster versions of dwarves. In the same way that like when Nords showed up in Greenland or whatever for the first time, that the people there were like, oh my god, these giant monsters,
demons.
Yeah, exactly. So we kind of played with the perspective on that and reskinned them as Durgar, which allowed us to play with like the pallor of their skin and some of their size. They innately have the enlarge ability. And their like hit points are a little bulkier than an average dwarf, but it kind of like painted this monster picture, but challenge rating wise was well within the party's means to handle as well. And balancing was something that, because I remember there was for a while there, when we were talking, James, there were a couple of things like the sunlight puzzle and stuff where James's instinct was to hurt you guys really bad. Or like the stone getting by the like manners rock. James's instinct was like, yeah, we'll just, if they have been paying attention, they'll know that they need to rhyme, so we don't need to like give them a clue or do it. And I was like, well, I feel like we should probably give them a hint, because from my experience, if you don't give them a hint, if you give them a hint like a month in advance, nobody's gonna remember that. But yeah, James was very much from the old school rules sideline of like, if you fuck it up, you die.
It would have been very punishing if I had been allowed to have my way with this dungeon. Yeah.
Well, the one thing about that though that I like though was it was a mental dungeon, so it was like I was actually expecting that, because I was like, if we die, you just bring us back, or like you just like we're just in memory, like, so there's no there's like literally no rules to this. So I was like, that will be fun if we do die inside Grundor's head, like what the consequences of that would be. I also I did not piece together that we were supposed to rhyme until somebody else did. But the other thing that I think is funny is you're the only person in our party who like does puzzle solving and like as a player is like, cool, let's talk about this and figure out what is going on. So since you were in control, it's like the rest of us are just sort of like, cool, let's just move and do stuff.
I think initially I wanted damage to be done to the players every time that you spoke without rhyming throughout the entire dungeon. Like, I think I wanted just one hit point taken away every single time that you spoke without completing the rhyme. And that was, but also that was why we introduced the alcohol so early in the dungeon. So Grundor has basically two main characteristics, which is that he rhymes when he speaks while sober, and he drinks a lot. So yeah, the alcohol was like we wanted it to be something that healed and that made you stronger, since Grundor as a character uses it as a crutch all the time. So that was because that was the sunlight puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
That was the next one, where there was a room with shafts of sunlight shining through that every round somebody would roll, and depending on what they rolled, the sunlight would shift positions, and if you were struck by sunlight, you were hurt. But we had casks of alcohol all around the room that you could drink to gain protection from the sunlight and to and also gain some hit points back. I think Tyler, you were the one that said like, oh, I think we're experiencing a hangover right now, and that was I don't know what my point here was. But,
yeah, that was our only like grid puzzle or like grid base, and it's the first time I've broken out the battle mat in like 15 sessions. Yeah, it's been a while. But we just don't play that kind of game very much. I'm curious how that felt from the other side of the screen too, seeing that come out, and then also mechanically.
Cool. I mean, it was a fun creation for a style of puzzle in that it was a randomized floor map basically, in terms of like we all knew what the parameters were, and it was just like a matter of choosing where you stepped, and every round it could potentially be wrong or right. And then it was a thing of like getting to a cask enabled you to heal and also have protection for like the next round of sunlight, but it would usually they were out of the way, so it would take longer. So you could either go to the cask or just try to kind of like beeline across, which I thought was super fun. And the like mechanically making someone experience what like DTs are, like delirium tremens, like terrible hangover, was very entertaining, just from a perspective of like the fucked upness of being like, oh, I need to get to that cask of booze so I can heal and feel better, was just great.
Yeah. It was super fun for me. And then, yeah, I do want to dive into that Knowles combat encounter briefly as well, because I'm curious.
Oh.
It was like barely a combat encounter. It was more like
it's just a display of power.
Yeah, it was like it's kind of like an interactive cutscene, I would say. And I'm curious if that sort of like went the way you intended it when we sort of built the encounter, and also if it was like if it was as fun a moment as we like. It was fun. I think it was fun from our side.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't know how it felt from the other side, which is I'm curious how that is for you too, because that's often my experience DMing. In a nutshell, is like I think this is fun, but like I don't really know.
That was the part of the dungeon that I was most looking forward to showing to everybody, was that we gave every member of the party one of Grundor's spells, but
signature spells.
Yeah, like one of his signature spells, but cranked it up to 11. So like Goodberry.
It was like a meteoric giant Goodberry.
Yeah, it was like a 3-ton berry was dropped on a horde of gnolls. Or the beast speech was my favorite one, which Alan came up with, which was that you had it, Tyler, yeah, where every time that he spoke, an actual animal would come parading out of his mouth and attack the enemies. So that was the one that I was really looking forward to the most, was just making everybody feel so powerful and so destructive. It's like that. You guys ever play Force Unleashed? You play that one?
Yeah, I remember the first one.
Yeah. So the beginning of
that game's like 10 years old.
It is. I think I played it in like college. But the first level of that game is you playing as Darth Vader fighting a planet full of Wookiees, and you're so overpowered as Darth Vader that like nobody can hurt you, and the abilities that you have are so just absurd that you're like throwing piles of Wookiees around with your mind, and I've always loved that feeling of being so overly powerful in a game, and so that's what I was hoping the players would feel also.
Success. I mean, yeah, it was very fun getting to be in a situation. Yeah, I think that description is pretty perfect, of like being so overpowered where it was just like, oh, we are annihilating, was like super fun. Yeah, it was great. It was very fun, and it is an interesting thing. More broadly for like DMs at home and stuff is like sometimes it's useful to remember to like sometimes put in an encounter that's wildly underpowered to the like character level, just to remind people of like how far they've come and stuff. It was because it was just fun to have like a moment of like, oh, this isn't a challenge. We're destroying. This is great. But also because it was, oh, this is how Grundor thinks he did. And just was like really sad as a result.
Which is double hilarious because he spent a lot of that, like the party almost died in that encounter. So to make it easy is kind of dumb and funny, but also specifically Grundor spent many rounds of that combat unconscious.
Right.
Like that encounter did not at all go that way.
No,
Yeah.
He was close to, Grundor, I think, was saved 2 or 3 times from death in that original encounter.
And we lost a guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was where Vareth died. So it was very entertaining to be playing less and seeing, because the other thing you guys did was you had it that each character basically saved themselves in the battle of the gnolls. Like Shava saw herself getting attacked by these gnolls and then unleashed as like Grun Shava this like attack. And so then it was like, what does Les see? And it was like, well, I think Les sees Vareth, but like you can't save Vareth, he's dead. So it was just like this funny like moment of just like almost more like saluting a fallen warrior. It was great. It was very fun.
What were the other components? The other thing was this dungeon was very complex. Like there was a bunch of stuff in it, and I was worried that we weren't going to get through all of it. But they actually went through the stuff a lot faster than I thought they would. Actually, we didn't get to One Piece.
Yeah, we skipped over One Piece because just based on how it was going, I was like, I don't think we're gonna make it out of here because I anticipated the ostrich combat going for like a while, and it did. So we kind of skipped over one thing.
I forget
which was the heroic rescue of the casks of ale from the burning.
That's right.
House.
Yeah. But also, like we had, we had 3 different rooms that the party could have gone into at a given time, and we had encounters planned for each of them. But it was up to us which one we decided to play in them. So we were doing some rearranging on the fly, and and so I think that it was coming down to whether we were going to do the ostrich fight or the rescuing of the kegs of ale, and both Alan and I were like, we got to do the ostrich fight.
Yeah, ostrich is key. Speaking of rearranging things on the fly, did running that, so in terms of running it, right, so that we sort of talked about like how we came up with it and what building it and what our sort of like intended effects and feelings were. How did it feel running it? What kind of like insights did you glean? If you had to put into words what the major differences are between playing from the player side and playing from the DM side, just like a general breakdown of what that experience is like, or how it maybe has changed your perception of the game even.
Yeah. So when we're playing, when I'm playing as a party member, I depend a lot on everybody else to make things happen. Because like I said, I haven't played a ton of Dungeons and Dragons. So I always love seeing what other people do with the abilities that they have. So whenever we come into a situation, it's like, well, there's 3, 4, or 5 of us here. I'm sure that somebody is gonna have an idea. But when you are the DM and a player says, okay, so what do I see here? And you have to just provide it. I felt like on the spot a lot more than I usually do as a player. And also, there's a ton of subtlety that goes into it that I would never have noticed if I didn't know what we were working towards as it was happening, that Alan was providing. Just like when there was a certain, I think the rock, what were we calling it? The etiquette stone or the manners rock?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so there was a like huge
the cotillion stone
creature. Okay. there's this rock creature blocking their path at one point, and they really all they had to do was speak a rhyme to it, and it would get out of the way. But Alan set it up in such a great way that led the players to the solution, whereas, again, I was ready to just be so punishing about it and just put them up against a rock wall and not reveal that anything, that it was alive or that anything needed to happen. I was just going to let them kind of flounder against the rock for a while until...
Dugan's got kind of like a Gary Gygax thing going on. He's like, here it is, now you fucking deal with it or don't.
And I think that's actually how I like to play is like, give me a situation and then let me test the boundaries and see what responds to me, and then I'll make my decision about where to go forward. And that style has led to me or to Grundor getting sucked into books and getting knocked unconscious or like drinking potions that he shouldn't be drinking. But I do think that I think that that's a lot of the fun of Dungeons and Dragons. So that's what I was trying to create as a DM, was perhaps too difficult of scenarios, but Alan was so great about hinting towards the solution at the beginning, which is what all good games should do. Is like kind of give you the tools to complete the puzzle, but not how you put them together to do it, I guess. And I was very much like, hey, here's a room, now you got to find the tools and put them together, rather than meeting them halfway.
So I have a question for you guys, because we played today, and the the stone of memory or orb of memory, the artifact that you created to enable the Grungeon, is turning out to have sort of plot significance to the ongoing story of Activia and her family and the secrets they have therein. And so I'm curious what the order of events for things were, like who broached the idea of a Grungeon, and how it went about, like how much it was intended from the outset. I guess, like, what came first, the idea of this, like, orb of memory, and that being relevant to the plot, or did the idea of a Grungeon come first and then the justification come?
I can tell you from my perspective what happened, and then Alan can fill in.
Oh yeah, that's
fill
fun.
in the blanks. Alan told me first that he wanted to do a dungeon that was in Grundor's mind, and so and I think that was when I just sent him the history of Grundor that I wrote up, and then when we were playing and this orb arrived in our party, Alan just slid me a note that said, touch the orb, it'll be worth it, trust me. And so I did, and then and that ended up being what sucked everybody into my brain. So when he said touch it, it'll be worth it, that's when I was like, okay, I think I know what we're doing next week.
Yeah, that's basically how that happened. Yeah, I'm glad you trusted me and touched it, or else that would have just sucked for me.
Well, I'm also curious about that because I was the one that picked up the orb and had it. I wrapped it, like I didn't make physical contact with it. What would have happened if I had touched the orb?
You would have. I mean, we would have gone into the less gin, which I would have been like, hell yeah.
That's really funny.
So yeah, it would have happened. I just figured, I had a feeling that the party would have been reticent to touch it or like do anything to it, because I tried to set the circumstances up to be like creepy enough. And also in the past there have been some light punishes for like randomly touching and grabbing at stuff.
Yeah.
Normally again to Grundor, but just setting a precedent. I felt like the precedent was strong enough that like, hey, this could do anything or be bad news, was enough. And then also hoping that the note would be enough to get Grundor to do it before anybody else, at least. But I was fully open to the possibility that like, yeah, we could be going into like anybody's head right now. I did know several weeks before I had even come up with the orb of memory as an item. I had known that I wanted to do a Great Grungeon session, so it was just something that I had kind of like I feel like this, I'm sure you do this too, Tyler, where I come up with like things where I'm like, oh, this would be a fun encounter or a fun dungeon or a fun adventure, like a side adventure or something. And then you just kind of like flesh them out or sketch them out, and then you sit on them for a while until they make sense. And I once I was coming up with, I mean, I don't want to spoil anything that's coming up, but once I was coming up with the idea of this orb and like where it came from and what the party may or may not use it for, I was like, oh, it'd be cool if while it's unclaimed and like unattuned, if it had this like sort of side effect trigger or like surge, uncontrolled like memory surge trigger that will enable me to put into play this dungeon that I've sort of been working on with James. And then once he touched it, I was like, all right, well now we like really have to get it done. So we like met up in because we've been kind of going back and forth willy-nilly in emails. But we hadn't really sat down and like beat the thing out yet.
And when we did sit down, it took us like 45 minutes.
Yeah, we had laid a lot of groundwork already.
Yeah.
So
and I think that I just thought of something else that maybe answers a question that had been brought up earlier. Is something else that I really gained appreciation for was the storytelling aspect of being a DM. Like the language that you use, and it's just so important to really set the scene and give some like nice juicy language and imagery to the stuff that happens, because that's what triggers a response in the players. And this is again something that Alan was just so good at. And there was times when we were running this that I was kind of just like, oh, I want Alan to do this because he's got like such good language for it. But I definitely wanted the overpowered spells. That was a part where I was like, yes, I want to really be able to describe these in the most graphic ways possible. So yeah, that's just a thing that I didn't quite appreciate about your DMing until now, Alan.
Yeah, it's something we've talked about on this show before, actually, is just that constant reminders that, especially if you're playing sort of theater of the mind style, as we often do, the only experience of the world that the players have is through the things that you say as a DM. And it's easy to, I think from the DM side of the screen, it's easy to get lost in keeping track of mechanical things, because there's so many, like you're tracking 5 different monsters' healths, and whose turn it is, and like what items they have at their disposal, or like what they're about to find, or what's coming up next. There's like a lot of, like mechanical stuff to track. That it's easy to sometimes forget that, like, oh yeah, everything I don't tell them, they don't know. Like,
right.
Literally, if I don't say it out loud, they have no reason to suspect that such a thing exists.
Yeah, and it's a story, and like you are the writer of it, so there is a lot of just a lot of responsibility that you have as the dungeon master to paint the scene.
Yeah. So 2 questions for you, James, that are sort of related.
I'm ready.
One, good, because this is where it gets real. One, they're very related. Has this experience changed how you will be playing Grundor going forward, and has it changed how you will be playing the game in general going forward?
Let's see. Is it changed how I'm going to play Grundor? Well, I don't know. I don't think so, because this is all supposed to be stuff that is true about him and has always been true. So I don't think that there was anything really revealed in the flashback that is going to change how Grundor acts throughout the rest of the campaign. And I feel like definitely in this campaign I have learned that part of the fun of the game is just like doing things and letting the DM respond to them. Like the ostrich was an example of that, where we encountered a guy that was selling cooked birds, and Garrett's parrots, yeah. And somebody mentioned that there was an ostrich hanging there, and I just said I want to eat the ostrich, and then Alan had to invent mechanics for a eating challenge on the fly. And I don't know, that was I thought that was just such a fun moment in the game. And
which I also want to sidebar to say, I don't know if we've discussed this, but Alan had a t-shirt made for
Yeah.
you as Garrett's Parrots champion ostrich eater.
Right.
Which, if we ever hit the point in or get enough clamoring on social media for people wanting their own Garrett's Parrots ostrich eating championship, maybe it will exist as an item. But for right now, it's a singular, one of a kind.
Yeah, and
James Dugan only.
I wore it through the whole session last time, and I meant to wear it again today. But I had been working before I came here, so I forgot to bring it with me.
Have you worn it out and about?
No, I haven't.
I'm curious to hear what responses you get from people.
Well, and it's great because it is. Did you design the logo and everything too, Alan?
Yeah, I envisioned it, and I hired a line artist to make it to my specifications. On Fiverr.
Oh, okay.
So I found an image, an old school image of Colonel Sanders that I liked, and I had them change his appearance to my specifications, and then also like the layout of the logo I basically made, but I have no artistic skill, so I had to pay somebody to actually put it on a paper.
It is great, and it's just like a picture of Colonel Sanders, I think, giving a thumbs up or like the OK sign. And it says,
it's Garrett.
and it says
it's Colonel Garrett.
Sorry, Colonel Garrett, and then it says like Garrett's Parrots official ostrich champion, with little pictures of ostriches running on it. So that was great, and that I got so excited when you pulled that out, and I put it on immediately.
Yeah, Alan's been excited about it for a month.
Yeah.
And just hasn't been able to give it to you. But yeah, so secondary question, has it changed? Do you think it will change how you play D&D going forward? Not specifically your character, but just now that you've been on the other side of the screen, does it change how you relate to the game or envision interacting with it?
Actually just literally being on the other side of the screen and seeing what is on the other side, where it has all these tables to help you create characters and situations and all that so quickly. I think that I'm not going to be nearly as afraid of throwing wrenches into the mix, or of just trying to do things, because for a while I thought, it's rude if I don't want to throw off what Alan has planned, or I don't want to try and mess with what he's got. And actually, I was talking with Becca about that last week, and she said that she kind of feels the same way when she's playing. But it really is if we take more ownership over it, I think it makes it more fun for the DM. Also,
yes, I agree, because I think planning stuff is super fun, but it's way more interesting to, I think, see the players do things that you hadn't anticipated, and then because then you get to play the game live, right? I think from the DM side, the session planning is super fun, but that's kind of on your own. And if the players stick to the script, so to speak, they don't do anything outside of what you had prepped for, then you've already played that session. I played it and now I'm relaying it to you. But when the players take ownership and start doing stuff, especially if it's stuff I haven't prepped for or anticipated, then I get to play the game in the room. You know what I mean? Tyler.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that of one of my biggest pet peeves with D&D is anytime you go to a new place and that is a civilized place, like a city or something, I feel like the temptation as a DM is always to be let me introduce you to this new world I've created for you. So one of my favorite things as a player is always to be oh, I've been here before. Just to throw out, that's how I was oh, I've been here. We should go check out Garrett's Parrots. They've got pretty good fried parrots. And just bullshitting that out and then letting it go. One of my biggest pet peeves is when DMs don't take advantage of that and are you're all brand new to this place, and it's screw that. It should always be you've been here before. You can change the context dramatically and be it's a lot different than what you remember, but what do you remember of this place, and things like that is always so fun to force people to describe random bullshit that you can then be 100% yes. So when Alan took us to this bazaar in that capital city, where it is as a DM, the worst thing to have to do is fill up a place full of shops. sucks.
That is the worst.
It's the worst. And so it's like the answer is always just let your players do it. Just be like, you've shopped here before. I mean, or you've been to shops before, your character has. So you tell me like what kind of shop you would go to and describe like what you would expect to see. And then like magically, that's exactly what you saw. It's amazing. You described what I planned perfectly.
Yeah, and that creates much more of a shared world rather than this feeling of the player being like, oh, what are the rules of your world, and like what am I allowed to do here? Instead, it does make you feel a lot more like, oh, well, like I've been here before. I know my way around, and people here know me also. Yeah. That's so much fun. I really love. That's always fun to be recognized.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, I'm excited to find out as we go forward where Grundor's been before.
Yeah. Well, he's probably been a lot of places and made lasting impressions on a lot of people. What?
Good or bad?
Well, his sexual prowess is pretty legendary.
That is true.
At this point. Yeah. He hasn't had that many negative interactions. I imagine that... Oh, well, no, because there was the bar that we worked at for a while.
Yeah,
we kind of ran that into the ground.
Well, no, I think we did pretty well with the bar.
Did we?
I feel like we did. We kept it afloat. We sent them extra ale and stuff.
Yeah.
And we had 80s night. But I also, having now experienced your childhood and growing up, I would guess that it's a lot of experience of like people remembering you as being like that weird, quiet kid that was like off in the corner trying to talk to the wall. just like not a lot of necessarily like lasting friendships, but rather just like, oh, whoa, like you look a lot different now. You were in a tough spot last time I saw you.
Well, a lot of people call him the Stone Speaker because he doesn't speak to them, and they never get to know what his name is. They only see him speaking to stones.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah, it was all intentional.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts about your experience running your first dungeon?
I had such a good time. I loved getting the designing of it was so cool, and just it's like a creative muscle that I haven't worked maybe ever. Was like creating puzzles and creating experiences and then watching people run through them. It's a very unique experience that you don't get unless you are like an escape room designer or
or a dungeon master.
Yeah, or a dungeon master. There's so few things that let you do that. I really, really liked that. I loved the trying to come up with the puzzles and then watching how everybody else dealt with them was really interesting. And it was a little frustrating. I feel like there was one time when I wanted to just be like, they're doing it wrong. Come on.
When they escaped through the ceiling of that tunnel?
Oh, yeah.
I figured that's what you were talking about.
Right. Yeah, because, I don't even remember what we had planned for them at this point either.
The tunnel collapse.
Yeah.
And see, that's for me, that's the opposite moment where I was like, ooh, they're doing a thing that we didn't expect at all. Wow, what now? So I was like, wow, cool. I can't believe we didn't plan for this.
Yeah.
So that made me like really excited. So it's interesting that so you took that moment and you were kind of like, dang it.
Yeah.
And I'm curious why. Did it feel like they feel like the party basically beat the scenario, or did it feel like maybe you did it feel more like a failure in design, that it didn't go the way you kind of like intended?
It felt like I was promised absolute power and then was watching it be taken away from me. That's the best way I can describe it. Is that I was told that things were going to go a certain way and that it was going to be my doing, and then these pathetic mortals came in and did what they wanted to do instead. So
Damn.
I would be a very vengeful god if
you were an Old Testament god.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. And I just, I think that honestly, I think that is a natural feeling, for like, first few rounds DMing.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and we on our Twitter we actually asked people just kind of broadly what they would do differently if they could go back and re-DM their first few sessions. And a common theme that came up was like, don't overplan too much. Don't worry about like sticking to the script too much, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because I think that is a natural feeling to be like, but I built this whole thing and you're ignoring it, and there's like it like itches you in a weird way, which is fun for me too, especially like, and I'm curious now about your thoughts on this, the idea of like the players having no idea, right? Like, because they don't know what you have planned, they don't know what the quote unquote solution is, if there is one. So they have no choice but to operate under the assumption that they're doing it the best way possible at all times.
And that just reminds me of, I mean, one of the first sessions that we had when we spent an hour exploring a house that you...
God, I fucking hated that session. Episode 2 of the podcast, folks. I talk about how big fat failure I felt like for that session. Go ahead.
Well, it was like we were introduced to this this character and told where his house was, and so we all went and like obstacles were put up every step of the way, and we just kept pushing through them instead of giving up. And we spent an hour exploring this house and ultimately walking away with nothing from it. And I have no idea what you really had planned for us that day, but instead you had to like list off books that were in a library, and you had to keep putting new characters in there who would tell us that we shouldn't be there before we just knocked them out and continued to explore this house. But I feel like you did get your revenge by later having us arrested for breaking and entering that house and putting us through court. The other thing was there came a point when we were in the Grungeon when there was some element. Oh, it was the like speaking stone that we had, where we came to that room and I just completely forgot what we had planned for that and like what the purpose of this stone was. So I said that to Alan. I was like, I forget what this is, so can you run this part? And then I think maybe a minute later, Alan was like, "No, you're gonna be the stone instead." And so for that whole part, I was kind of just like treading water, interacting with the players as this stone for a while until they like moved on and made a decision. Because I just had completely forgotten what the point of that room was.
Yeah. But I still wanted you to be in it. That's why I kind of like was like, well, all right, I'll narrate it, but you have to be the thing.
Right.
That's my compromise as we run this. But anyway, I do want to thank you for coming onto the show.
Oh man, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And also thank you for helping me design the Grungeon.
Dude, I had such a good time.
I think it was a success? Question mark? I mean,
I do. I thought it was great. I actually thought it was going to be a multi-session experience.
I thought about it, but I didn't want... a lot of our players have weird nebulous schedules.
Yeah.
So multi-session dungeons are tricky, and then especially if James is missing, I didn't want to like force ourselves into a weird offshoot thing.
Yeah, try to run a memory that's not real.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I did have a blast doing that with you. It's my first time experimenting with pulling a player over the wall, so to speak, to like do that side of it.
And I tell you, the other thing was that I toyed with the idea of just letting this whole experience kill Grundor. Also, was like coming back was everybody coming out of his mind? Maybe like they rip all of his memories out, and he's just left a husk of what he was or something.
Yeah, they come out and they're like, "Whoa, Grundor, we had no idea all that stuff happened to you when you were a kid." And Grundor's eyes roll back in his head, and his nose starts bleeding, and he just dies.
Yeah.
Which
would have been a great way for a character to go.
Should have done that.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess they could be overnight consequences or something. But anyway, yeah, thanks again for coming, man.
Thank you.
For helping me design this puzzle, and I'm excited to see what you guys do over the next couple of sessions with this new fun duckpin bowling ball-like object.
Yeah, this duckpin bowling ball is incredible. I do feel like the temptation to try to incept something, like to try to go into a memory and then go into somebody else's memory inside of that memory, feels very high to me.
Got to do it. I mean, there's nothing stopping you.
I know, except for it's not mine.
That's true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tyler, do you have a phrase of the day for us?
I do have a phrase of the day. And it's this. Folks, remember this. A dungeon is designed for only two types of people, prisoners and heroes. It's up to you to decide which one you are.
Wow.